The present moment is calling you back. If you're ready to listen. Buddhist wisdom. You are already late. Not to a meeting, not to an appointment. Late to yourself. Late to the only thing that was ever truly yours. The present moment has been arriving at your door every second of every day, knocking without sound, waiting without complaint, offering everything without condition. And you have been answering from the next room, shouting that you will be there in a minute, then another minute, then a year, then a decade, until the knock becomes so familiar you no longer hear it at all. This is the story of that knock. And what happens when you finally open the door? The city does not help. The city is engineered to keep you absent. Every notification is a small theft of now. Every screen is a window into elsewhere that feels more urgent than here. Every advertisement is a hymn to the future, to the version of yourself that will finally arrive once you have the right product, the right achievement, the right body, the right life. And every scroll through the curated suffering and triumph of strangers is a quiet lesson that your own present moment is not enough, that you should be somewhere else, doing something else, being someone else entirely. The common enemy has no face. It does not wear a mask. It wears your habits. It lives inside the reflex of reaching for the phone before your eyes have finished opening. It lives in the way you eat while watching, walk while listening, speak while planning what to say next. It lives in the strange modern talent for being physically present and mentally elsewhere simultaneously, for sharing a room with someone you love while actually living inside a glowing rectangle in your hands. Buddhism has a word for this condition. It is called the wandering mind. And what it wanders toward, more than anything else, is either the past or the future. Two territories that exist only as stories, only as the mind's insistence on editing what was or scripting what will be. The present moment, the only place where life is actually happening, remains unvisited. A country you were born in, but never explored. Here is the paradox that changes everything. The present moment is not a place you have to travel to. It is not a state you have to earn. It is not a reward waiting on the other side of enough discipline or enough practice or enough suffering. It is happening right now, inside your breath, inside your heartbeat, inside the weight of your body on whatever surface holds you. It is the temperature of the air in your nostrils. It is the subtle sound beneath all sounds. It is the awareness reading these words before the mind interprets them. You are not far from it. You have never been far from it. You are it, trying to remember that you are it. The teaching is this simple and this difficult. Share this with someone who has forgotten to arrive. And if this channel speaks to the monk inside you, the one who still believes that clarity is possible, even in the noise, subscribe. Because there is more. There is always more. There is a monk who lives in every city you have ever passed through. You may not have noticed him. He does not wear robes on the subway, though sometimes he does. He does not sit in lotus position on the sidewalk, though sometimes he does. More often, he looks like everyone else. He stands in line at the coffee shop. He waits for the bus. He navigates the identical corridors of office buildings and hospital waiting rooms and airport terminals, where fluorescent light has replaced the sky. What makes him different is invisible. It is the quality of his attention. It is the fact that wherever he is, he has actually arrived. This is the art that has been almost entirely lost in the modern world. The art of arrival. Buddhism did not invent this art, but it has studied it with extraordinary precision for 2,500 years. It has mapped the territory of the present moment the way other sciences have mapped stars or cells, with rigor, with humility, with the willingness to test the map against actual experience rather than defending it against reality. What it found is both simple and strange. The present moment is not a thin sliver between past and future. It is not a knife's edge of time so narrow that by the time you try to stand on it, you have already fallen into memory or anticipation. The present moment, when you actually enter it, when you actually stop running long enough to look around, is vast. It has depth and texture and a quality of aliveness that the thinking mind almost never touches. The Zen tradition calls it the gateless gate. You cannot force your way through it. But when the striving stops, you discover you were already on the other side. What does this mean in a city? What does it mean on a Tuesday morning when the inbox is full and the train is delayed and 3 people need things from you that you do not have? It means this. In every moment of overwhelm, there is a ground beneath the overwhelm. In every moment of anxiety, there is a space in which the anxiety is occurring. In every moment of distraction, there is an awareness that is not distracted, that is simply watching the distraction arise and pass like weather. Finding that ground, that space, that awareness, is not escape. It is not spiritual bypass. It is the most practical act available, because from that ground you can act with clarity rather than react from panic. From that space you can speak with care rather than discharge your disturbance onto the nearest person. From that awareness you can make choices rather than be made by your conditioning. The monk in the city does not have a different life than yours. He has a different relationship to the life he has. Let us begin where everything begins, with the breath. Not as a relaxation technique, not as a wellness hack, not as something you do for 10 minutes in the morning and then forget for the rest of the day. The breath is what it actually is, the most precise teacher of impermanence you will ever encounter. The thing that has been happening inside your body every few seconds since before you had a name for it, and that will continue until you do not. Every breath is a small death and a small resurrection. The exhale releases something. The inhale receives something. Neither can be held. Try to hold your breath, and the body immediately begins its own insurrection, its own non-negotiable demand to keep moving, to keep changing, to keep releasing and receiving in the rhythm that sustains life. This is impermanence made physical. This is the teaching made undeniable. When you place your attention on the breath, something interesting happens. The mind wants to leave. Almost immediately, sometimes before you even settle, a thought appears. A plan, a worry, a memory, a judgment about how you are doing with this whole breathing awareness thing. And then another thought. And then a small cascade of thoughts that carries you away from the breath and into a story that feels more urgent, more real, more deserving of your attention. This is not failure. This is the practice, the return, the noticing that you have wandered, and the gentle redirection back to the breath. That return is not a consolation prize for failing to stay present. It is the exercise itself. The monk Pema Chodron once described it this way. The moment of noticing that your mind has wandered is itself a moment of awakening, a flash of awareness, brief but real, in which the hypnosis breaks. And the path of practice is built from those flashes, accumulated over time, until the flashes become longer and more frequent, and eventually the hypnosis is not the default, but the exception. Breathe now, if you are willing, not because you are supposed to, not to perform mindfulness, but to simply notice what is already happening. Air moving through the nose, chest expanding, belly rising, the subtle pause at the top of the inhale before the tide turns, and then the descent, the release, the small dying that is also a cleaning, a clearing, a making room. 3 breaths. That is all. 3 conscious breaths, in the middle of whatever else is happening. Not 3 breaths after you have finished your work. Not 3 breaths when things calm down. Not 3 breaths in a quiet room when you finally have the time. 3 breaths now, in the noise, in the complexity, in the middle of the ordinary Tuesday that contains, if you look carefully, the entire teaching. The Buddha was not peaceful because nothing difficult happened to him. This is perhaps the most important misunderstanding to dissolve before we can go further. The image of a serene figure sitting beneath a tree in a state of untouchable bliss is beautiful, but it is also, if taken literally, useless, because the implied teaching is that peace is something you achieve by removing yourself from difficulty, by finding the right conditions, by waiting until the storms pass. The actual teaching is the opposite. Before the Enlightenment, Siddhartha Gautama was a prince who had been protected from suffering by walls built specifically to keep it out. His father had arranged his entire world to ensure that no illness, no death, no poverty, no decay would ever disturb the magnificent fiction that life is only pleasant. And it worked until it didn't. Until one day, Siddhartha went outside the palace walls and met in quick succession an old man, a sick man, a corpse, and a wandering ascetic. 4 encounters that shattered the fiction and sent him into 6 years of searching. The walls his father built are not so different from the walls the mind builds in the modern world. The walls of entertainment, of constant stimulation, of algorithmic optimization that learns exactly what keeps you scrolling and never shows you what you might need to see. The walls of productivity culture that equate busyness with worth, so that stillness feels like failure, and silence feels like falling behind. And like Siddhartha, eventually something happens that the walls cannot contain. A loss, a diagnosis, a relationship that ends, a career that collapses, a moment of raw honesty in the middle of the night, when the usual defenses are down and the mind, exhausted by its own running, finally stops long enough to ask the question it has been avoiding. What is actually happening here? What is actually real? These moments are not punishments. In the Buddhist tradition, they are called Dharma gates, openings, places where the ordinary trance cracks and something more honest can enter. The wandering monk did not teach peace as the absence of difficulty. He taught it as something that can coexist with difficulty, something that does not require the difficulty to stop, something found not above or outside the noise but inside it, in the space that the noise occurs within, in the awareness that holds both the sound and the silence. This is what the present moment actually offers, not a reprieve from your life, your actual life, met without the layer of resistance that turns experience into suffering. There is a practice taught in meditation circles that goes by the name RAIN, not as an acronym designed for efficiency, but as an image, as what it actually describes. The way that rain does not argue with the earth it falls on. The way it simply arrives and is received and transforms and passes. Recognize what is happening. Allow it to be here. Investigate it with curiosity rather than judgment. And then, the hardest step, the one that requires the most practice, do not identify yourself with what you find. Walk through this slowly. Recognize. This sounds simple, but it is already a revolution. Most of what drives our behavior is unrecognized. The irritability that makes you sharp with a coworker at 10 in the morning is recognized as their fault, rather than the residue of a night of poor sleep and an argument you had in your head during the commute. The anxiety that makes you reach for the phone is recognized as a need to check something urgent rather than a need to escape the mild discomfort of being alone with your thoughts for 30 seconds. Recognition is the lamp turned on in a room you have been navigating in the dark. Allow. This is not acceptance in the sense of approval. It is not saying that what you are experiencing is good or right or preferred. It is saying that it is here, that it has already arrived, that it is already in the room, and that pretending it is not here only gives it the additional power of the unacknowledged. When you allow an emotion or sensation to simply be present without fighting it, something surprising often happens. It does not grow. Often, it begins to move, because resistance is what creates the dam. Allowance is what lets the water find its natural flow. Investigate. This is the movement from being inside the experience to gently looking at it. Where is this sensation located in the body? What texture does it have? Is it tight or expansive, hot or cold, heavy or vibrating? The mind, when occupied with this kind of gentle investigation, moves from victim of experience to curious student of experience, and the curious student is not suffering in the same way. The curious student is, in some essential sense, already slightly free, not identified. This is the ground of the practice, the recognition that you are not your anxiety. You are the awareness in which anxiety arises. You are not your grief. You are the space wide enough to hold grief without being consumed by it. You are not your thoughts. You are what notices the thoughts. And that which notices is not caught by what it notices, in the same way that the sky is not harmed by the clouds that move through it. On a bus this morning, somewhere in the world, someone sat in traffic and for a moment put down the phone and looked out the window at the ordinary world and, for reasons they could not quite name, felt something loosen in their chest. That was the present moment, calling them back. They were ready to listen. The deepest revolution Buddhism proposes is not about becoming a different person. It is about discovering what you are underneath the person you have been constructing since childhood. Every human being alive today is carrying a story about themselves that was written largely by others. Parents, teachers, early experiences, cultural narratives about what constitutes success or failure, beauty or ugliness, worthiness or inadequacy. This story runs in the background of everything, coloring perception, filtering experience, predetermining which moments feel significant and which feel empty. The meditation teacher Tara Brach calls it the trance of unworthiness, the pervasive sense that there is something fundamentally wrong with you, something that needs to be fixed or hidden or compensated for, before you are allowed to simply be. This trance is so ubiquitous, so woven into ordinary consciousness, that most people do not recognize it as a trance at all. They simply experience it as reality. But sit quietly for any length of time and it begins to surface. The thoughts that tell you that you should be different, that you are falling behind, that other people have figured something out that you have not, that the present moment as it actually is cannot possibly be enough. These thoughts are not reporting facts. They are transmitting the trance. The present moment practice is, at its deepest level, the practice of seeing through the trance, not fighting it, not arguing with the thought that says you are not enough, not building an alternate story that says the opposite, because the alternate story is still a story, still operating inside the same prison with different wallpaper, but looking directly at what is actually here before the story. Looking at the raw data of experience before the mind has organized it into a narrative about what it means. What is here before the story? Sensation, sound, the feeling of aliveness that is already present and requires no achievement to justify. The simple fact of awareness, aware of itself in this moment, which is itself a kind of miracle so ordinary that it goes almost entirely unnoticed. The Zen tradition has a teaching that goes like this: before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The activities of life do not change. What changes is the one who performs them. What changes is the absence of an overlay of commentary and evaluation that made the chopping and carrying feel like suffering. What remains is the weight of the wood, the coldness of the water. The physical reality of this moment, which received without the trance, is simply life. Extraordinary in its ordinariness, vast in its simplicity. There is something that happens in cities that does not happen anywhere else. A particular form of loneliness that can only occur in crowds. You stand in a subway car, pressed close to 40 strangers, and feel completely alone. You walk through a street market where hundreds of people are speaking and laughing and exchanging money and goods, and feel you are watching it through glass. You sit in an office where the air itself vibrates with the activity of dozens of people working toward shared goals, and feel that none of it quite touches you, that you are present in body and absent in some other way that you do not have words for. This is not pathology. It is, in many cases, the natural consequence of moving through life in a state of mild but chronic disconnection from the present. Because connection, real connection, the kind that makes you feel less alone, requires two people to both be actually here. And when everyone is in their head, in their phone, in their projections and their plans, the physical proximity of bodies does not create the meeting of presence. The Buddhist concept of interbeing, articulated so beautifully by the teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, offers a different way of seeing this. Interbeing means that nothing exists independently. Everything that is here because of everything else. The coffee you drink in the morning contains the rain that fell on a mountain in Colombia or Ethiopia or Vietnam. The hands of the person who picked the cherries, the hands of the person who roasted them, the ships and trucks and distribution networks, the person across a counter who steamed the milk. The air you breathe right now contains molecules that were once breathed by everyone who has ever lived. The ground beneath your feet, even the concrete of the city, contains the compressed memory of geological time. You are not alone. You could not be alone even if you tried. The present moment, when you actually arrive in it, reveals this not as philosophy, but as felt experience. The boundary between self and other becomes, not erased, but less absolute. The stranger on the train becomes not a threatening unknown, but another node in the same vast network of causes and conditions that produced you both. Sitting in a metal tube, hurtling through darkness beneath a city, each carrying an interior life as complex and tender as your own. This is why monks who spend years in solitude often come out of it more connected to humanity, not less, because they have spent years in the direct experience of their own inner being with everything. They have felt in their own body and mind how completely porous the boundary of self actually is. And from that feeling, compassion arises not as a moral choice or a spiritual achievement, but as a simple recognition of what is actually true. You are alone in the crowd because you are not quite here. Come back. The crowd is waiting. Let us speak about time, not clock time, not the schedule, not the calendar, with its boxes of obligation and its deadlines that arrive with the indifference of weather. Let us speak about the lived experience of time, which is something entirely different from its measurement. Notice that some hours pass like water through open hands. An afternoon in a city you have never visited. A conversation that keeps surprising you. The absorption of making something, whether with words or wood, or paint or code, in which the self temporarily dissolves into the activity. In these states, time does not feel like a resource being consumed. It feels like a quality of experience, rich or thin, deep or shallow, but not primarily about duration. And notice that other minutes stretch into what feels like decades. The last 5 minutes of a meeting you stopped caring about an hour ago. the time between submitting something vulnerable and receiving a response. The moment in a hospital waiting room when numbers are being called and yours is not yet among them. Same unit of time, radically different experience of time. What creates the difference? Presence. When you are absorbed in what is actually happening, time becomes not a container for experience, but the experience itself. The present moment stops being a problem to manage and becomes the medium you are living in. The way fish do not experience water as a problem, but simply live in it, breathe it, move through it. Buddhism teaches that ordinary consciousness experiences time as something that happens to us, as a force we are subject to, as a resource that is always running out. The practice of presence begins to reveal something different, that the present moment is not a point on a line stretching from birth to death, that it is not a thin slice of an otherwise fixed and moving duration, that it is, in some way, that is difficult to articulate but available to direct experience, the only time there actually is. The past exists now as memory. The future exists now as anticipation. Both are present moment experiences. There is no place you can go to find the actual past or the actual future. There is only this, always only this awareness, this breath, this sensation, this moment of hearing or reading or wondering. The teacher Eckhart Tolle writes about what he calls clock time and what he calls psychological time. Clock time is functional and necessary. You use it to catch trains and meet friends and honor commitments. Psychological time is the mind's habit of living anywhere but now, the endless referencing back to what was and forward to what might be. The chronic displacement from the actual into the imagined. The practice is not to eliminate psychological time. You cannot and should not. The practice is to notice when you have slipped entirely into it, when you have disappeared into the story of past and future and lost contact with the living present, and to return, gently, without self-punishment, as many times as necessary. Every time you return is not a failure to have stayed. It is a success of noticing, and noticing is the heart of the practice. There is a story from the Zen tradition that is simple enough to seem like a children's fable and deep enough to spend a lifetime inside. A student comes to a master and says, "I have been practicing for 3 years, and I still cannot find peace." The master invites him to sit. They sit together in silence. After some time, the master asks, "Who is the one looking for peace?" The student stares at him. The master pours 2 cups of tea. He hands one to the student and says, "Drink your tea." The student drinks. The master says, "That is the teaching. The mind that is looking for peace cannot find it, because the looking is itself the disturbance. The seeker is the obstruction. Peace is not a thing to be found. It is what is already present when the search is suspended. And the search is suspended, even momentarily, in the simple, complete act of drinking tea. Not thinking about drinking tea, not performing the awareness of drinking tea, not narrating to yourself that you are mindfully present to this experience of drinking tea while feeling vaguely proud of your spiritual development, but simply, completely drinking tea. The heat of the cup in your hands, the smell before the first sip, the complex wave of sensation when it hits the tongue, the warmth moving down through the chest. This is available in every moment, not only in designated meditation time, not only in retreat or in temple, or in specially constructed spiritual environments, in the office, in the traffic, in the conversation with the person who is difficult, in the ordinary Tuesday that feels like it is happening to someone else. The Zen master Shunryu Suzuki said that in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. This is what the present moment restores. The beginner's mind. the quality of encountering your own life as if for the first time, the willingness to be surprised by the familiar, the ability to find the extraordinary hidden inside the ordinary, not because you have added something to the ordinary, but because you have removed the overlay of habit and assumption that was making it invisible. Now we need to talk about the second arrow. The teaching of the two arrows is one of the oldest and most useful maps in the entire Buddhist tradition. Simple to understand, difficult to actually live. The first arrow is the unavoidable pain of being alive, loss, illness, failure, the disappointment that comes from the gap between what you hoped for and what actually happened, the slow erosion of things you loved, the shock of sudden change. These arrows are coming. They cannot be dodged. To be human is to be struck by them. The second arrow is the one you shoot yourself. This is the suffering that arises not from the original pain, but from your response to the original pain. The story that this should not be happening, that you are being punished, that you are cursed, that you have done something to deserve this, that other people do not suffer this way, that it will always be like this, that you cannot bear it, that there is something wrong with you for not bearing it more gracefully. This is the arrow that doubles the wound. And the terrible paradox is that it feels like protection. The thinking that circles the original pain, the analyzing and explaining and contextualizing, feels like you are doing something about it. Feels like you are not simply sitting passively in the suffering, but actively engaging with it. But most of the time it is not engaging with the pain. It is building a story around the pain that keeps the pain fresh and alive long after it would otherwise have moved through. The present moment practice, more than almost anything else, is the practice of not shooting the second arrow. This does not mean pretending the first arrow did not land. It does not mean performing equanimity or putting on the face of someone who is okay with things they are not okay with. It means feeling the first arrow fully, actually feeling it in the body, which is what the mind story almost always prevents, and not then adding the weight of the story on top of the sensation. Grief, when it is actually felt in the body, is extraordinarily painful and also extraordinarily moving. It moves. It comes in waves that crest and pass. It has texture and location and a quality of aliveness, strange as that sounds, that the mind's resistance to grief does not have. The mind's resistance is what makes grief stick. The resistance is what makes a grief that would otherwise take months, take years. What makes a wound that would otherwise heal stay infected. The present moment does not ask you to be okay with what has happened. It asks you to be here with what is happening, which is always different, always moving, always already beginning to change. There is a practice called Tonglen that comes from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, taught by teachers like Pema Chodron, that works against every instinct the modern mind has developed. Most spiritual practice and most of life is oriented toward moving away from pain, toward cultivating the pleasant and avoiding the unpleasant, toward building the conditions that produce comfort and reduce difficulty. This is not wrong. It is natural. It is human. It is what the nervous system was designed to do. Tonglen reverses the direction. In Tonglen, you breathe in what is heavy, difficult, painful. You breathe out what is light, open, relieving. You take in the suffering and send out the ease. You do this first for yourself, then for others you know who are suffering, then for strangers, then for all beings everywhere who are experiencing something similar to what you are experiencing right now. Why would anyone do this? Because the habit of turning away from pain, your own and others, is also the habit that keeps you small. The wall you build to keep suffering out is the same wall that keeps joy from fully entering. The closing that protects you from being moved by difficulty is the same. Closing that prevents you from being moved by beauty. You cannot selectively numb. And because the willingness to breathe in what is difficult, to say yes to this too, to stop asking the present moment to be other than it is the practice that most directly opens what Buddhists call the bodhicitta, the awakened heart, the natural compassion that arises when the armor is removed, and you actually feel the vulnerability that you share with every being alive. You are not the only one who is struggling. Right now, in this exact moment, there are people in every city on earth having the worst day of their life. There are people discovering things they cannot recover from. There are people in waiting rooms, in delivery rooms, in hospital corridors, in refugee camps, in luxury apartments, in small rooms under leaking roofs. Every single one of them is in the present moment, whether they know it or not. Every single one of them is breathing, feeling, hoping, fearing, wanting things to be different and unable to make them so. The recognition of that shared humanity is not depressing. It is deeply connecting. It is the ground of compassion. And compassion, when it arises not as a performance of virtue, but as an actual felt recognition of our common condition, is one of the few things that makes the present moment not only bearable, but beautiful. Let us return to the city, because that is where most of us live. And the teachings that cannot survive the city are beautiful theories that will not help you much. The alarm goes off. This is, in the Buddhist tradition, a moment of extraordinary significance that we have almost entirely squandered. The transition from sleep to waking. The moment before habit takes over. The instant when the mind is not yet running its usual programs, not yet marshaling its defenses, not yet oriented to the tasks and anxieties of the day. What do you do in that moment? For most people, the answer is simple and devastating. They reach for the phone. Within 30 seconds of opening their eyes, they are receiving information about what other people are doing, what disasters have occurred, what outrage is currently circulating, what the weather is in a city they are not in. Within 60 seconds, the day's first anxiety has arrived. And the present moment, that brief open field between sleep and story, has already been colonized. What would it mean to protect that field? What would it mean to spend even 3 minutes in the morning as a beginner, before the expert with all their expertise and opinions and plans takes over? Place one hand on your chest. Feel the heart beating. This heart has been working without your supervision for every moment of your entire life. It has done this through your sleeping and your waking, through your grief and your joy, through your distraction and your attention. It has never demanded acknowledgement. It has never gone on strike. It has simply worked, moment by moment, keeping you alive. Before anything else, feel that. Receive that. Let that be the first thing. Rather than the email that arrived while you slept, rather than the news, rather than the algorithm's opinion about what you should be worried about today. I am here. I am alive. This breath is the first one. Every breath is the first one. Then, before rising, name one thing you are grateful for. Not a cataloged gratitude from your productivity app. Something real, something specific. Something you actually feel in the body. The warmth under the blanket, the sound of rain, the fact that someone you love is sleeping in the next room, the fact that your body healed something overnight that you did not know needed healing. Gratitude is not a positive thinking technique. It is a perceptual practice. It trains the mind to notice what is actually present rather than defaulting to what is absent. And what is actually present, when you actually look, is almost always more than the mind's story of scarcity had suggested. Before we go further, there is something that deserves to be said about the nature of practice itself. Because this word, practice, is used so often in spiritual and meditative contexts that it has begun to feel like a technical term belonging to a particular subset of people, the practitioners, The meditators, the ones who have apps on their phone for this purpose and cushions in a dedicated corner of their apartment. This is a misunderstanding that closes the door for most people before they have even looked through it. Practice, in the sense the tradition uses it, does not mean a special activity you add to your life. It means the quality of attention you bring to the life you already have. It means treating each ordinary moment as something worth showing up for rather than moving through. It means, very simply, choosing to be here more often than not. A surgeon practices surgery, not only in the operating room, but in the 10,000 smaller decisions and awarenesses that accumulate over years and build the capacity for precision under pressure. A musician practices music, not only in the formal rehearsal space, but in the way they begin to hear sound differently, in the way rhythm infiltrates their walking, in the way they notice things about acoustic environments that others pass through without registering. In the same way, someone who practices presence begins to notice what others pass through. The quality of a moment, the texture of silence, the way light changes, the way a conversation shifts when someone who is distracted suddenly arrives. The body's continuous commentary on what is happening, which most people have learned to mute, but which, when you begin to listen, is extraordinary in its precision and its honesty. This noticing is not an achievement you unlock after sufficient effort. It is not a reward for spiritual performance. It is simply what happens when attention is genuinely available. When the mind is not entirely occupied with its own commentary about what should be happening, what has happened, what might happen, there is room to actually notice what is happening. And what is happening is always more interesting than the mind's story about it. A street in the rain, the mind's version, inconvenience, cold, damage to shoes, need for umbrella, regret about not checking the weather app. The present moment's version, the smell of wet concrete, which is one of the oldest smells the human nose has evolved to recognize, connected to the experience of rain for so many thousands of generations that it arrives with a quality of ancestral familiarity. The sound of rain on different surfaces, tin and glass and leaf and asphalt, each with its own note and accord that is both complex and completely natural. The way the city looks through rain, edges softened, colors deepened, reflections appearing on the pavement that turn an ordinary street into a second city, an upside-down mirror world existing simultaneously with the one you are walking through. This is not poetry added to experience. This is experience when the filter of complaint is removed. Practice is removing the filter. Every day, many times a day. Not permanently, because the filter will return, because the mind will reapply its categories and its commentary, because this is what minds do. But repeatedly, with patience, with the recognition that returning is the practice, that the arc of the whole thing is not toward a state from which you never fall, but toward a faster, gentler return from wherever you have gone. The tradition has many names for what happens when the wandering mind is recalled. The Sanskrit word smriti, translated in Buddhist context as mindfulness, literally means remembering. Not remembering the past in the ordinary sense, but remembering the present. Remembering to be here. Remembering that here exists, that it was always here, that you simply forgot in the way, that a person lost in an absorbing dream forgets they are dreaming. This metaphor is more precise than it might seem. In a dream, the dreamer is completely convinced of the reality of the dream's contents. The anxiety is real. The danger is real. The landscape is real. The relationships are real. And then, if the dreamer becomes lucid, if something triggers the recognition that this is a dream, everything changes without the dream's contents changing. The same landscape, the same people, the same events, but suddenly experienced from a different quality of awareness. an awareness that knows itself to be aware, an awareness that recognizes it is watching rather than being run by what it watches. This is what contemplative traditions across cultures and millennia have been pointing toward. Not an escape from the contents of experience, not an ascent into some ethereal realm beyond ordinary life, but a shift in the relationship to the contents of experience. A shift from being completely identified with what the mind produces to being the awareness in which production occurs. The Buddhist teacher Ajahn Sumedho describes this with characteristic directness. He says, "The thinking mind is a wonderful servant and a terrible master. Thought is extraordinary. Language is extraordinary. The capacity to plan, to remember, to imagine, to create complex models of reality. This is what has allowed human beings to build cathedrals and cure diseases and send instruments into the outer reaches of the solar system. None of this should be abandoned. What should be recognized is what thought is not. Thought is not reality. Thought is the mind's map of reality. And a map, no matter how detailed and accurate, is not the territory it describes. When you mistake the map for the territory, when you are living entirely inside the mind's narrative about experience, rather than an actual experience, something essential is lost. Not the narrative, but the ground the narrative stands on. The present moment is that ground. It is not against thought. It contains thought. It holds thought the way the ocean holds a wave. The wave is real. The wave is extraordinary. The wave is capable of tremendous force. But it is not the ocean. And you are the ocean, not the wave. Here is something the modern world has lost almost entirely, and its loss accounts for a significant proportion of the dissatisfaction that drives people into therapy and philosophy and social media and pharmaceutical solutions and spiritual searching. The experience of genuine boredom. Not the anxious boredom of someone with nothing to do who cannot tolerate the absence of stimulation. The deep, quiet boredom of a mind that has been given nothing to do and has relaxed enough to simply notice what is here. This kind of boredom is, paradoxically, the threshold of creativity and insight. All the great traditions knew this. The Desert Fathers knew it. The Zen masters knew it. The Sufi poets whose verses arrived in states of deep stillness knew it. The great scientists who describe their discoveries as arriving not during furious effort, but during moments of relaxed, unfocused awareness knew it. The neuroscience confirms what the traditions have taught. The brain's default mode network, active during states of rest and mind-wandering, is associated not only with rumination and distraction, but with insight, creativity, and the integration of complex information. When the mind is given space to roam without agenda, it does something that focused attention cannot do. It makes unexpected connections. It integrates disparate experiences. It allows what has been percolating beneath the surface to rise. The present moment, when you actually inhabit it without filling it, is not empty. It is full of a particular quality of fullness that is available nowhere else. A receptive fullness, a noticing fullness. The kind of full that a clear lake is, in which you can see all the way to the bottom precisely because there is nothing clouding it. The modern world is terrified of this space. It has constructed an entire infrastructure to prevent it. The ubiquitous screen, the always available entertainment, the social feed that never ends, the podcast for every commute, and the television for every meal. All of these things are not inherently evil, but together they constitute a nearly total elimination of the empty spaces in which the deeper intelligence of the human mind has always operated. Guard your boredom. Guard your empty spaces. Guard the moments between things when nothing is required and everything is possible. They are not wasted time. They are the time in which you remember who you are when you are not performing. let us speak about what happens in the body when the mind finally stops arguing with the present moment. There is a physiological signature to presence that is both measurable and felt. The nervous system, when it shifts from the sympathetic activation of threat response to the parasympathetic state of genuine rest, undergoes changes that register throughout the entire organism. The breath deepens, not because you are controlling it, but because the unconscious tightening that kept it shallow has released. The belly, which has been guarded for reasons the mind can no longer fully remember, softens. The shoulders, which have been creeping upward with the low-grade vigilance of a person expecting the next emergency, drop. The jaw, clenched around words not yet spoken or words already spoken and still being evaluated, unclenches. This is the body returning home. And the mind follows. When the body sends safety signals rather than threat signals, the mind's surveillance function reduces. The constant scanning of the horizon for danger, the processing of hypothetical scenarios, the maintenance of defensive narratives, all of this requires energy. And when it is not required, when the body says there is no tiger right now, when the breath says there is no emergency, the mind's resources become available for something else, for noticing, for curiosity, for the kind of thinking that is not driven by fear, but by genuine interest, for the quality of attention that makes real encounter possible, real creativity possible, real connection possible. This is why the traditions have always begun with the body, not because the body is the destination, but because the body is the doorway. The body is always in the present moment. The mind can be anywhere, but the body, your actual physical form, this specific organism, is always here, always now, always available as an anchor, a compass, a teacher. The simple instruction to feel your feet on the ground is not a childish exercise. It is a profound and precise technology. Because the feet, which are in contact with the actual earth or the actual floor, are in contact with what is actually happening. They cannot be in yesterday. They cannot be in tomorrow. They are here. And when the mind follows the attention to the feet, the mind also becomes, for a moment, here. From here, everything is different. From here, you can hear what someone is actually saying rather than composing your response. From here, you can see what your child actually needs rather than managing their behavior. From here, you can feel what your body actually requires rather than overriding it. From here, you can make the decision that comes from wisdom rather than the decision that comes from the anxiety of feeling behind. The body is calling you home. It has always been calling. It calls with every sensation, with every hunger and tiredness and discomfort and pleasure, with the tenderness of illness and the aliveness of physical effort, with the precise communication of a gut feeling that the mind has learned to override and the heart has learned to dismiss, and the body refuses to stop sending because it knows something the other two have forgotten. The present moment lives in the body. Start there. There is a meditation that can be done anywhere, on the bus, in a meeting, in the line at the grocery store, in the middle of a difficult conversation. It takes less than 60 seconds and has the potential to completely reset the quality of your engagement with whatever comes next. It is called the stop practice. Stop. Whatever you are doing, for just a moment, pause. Not long, just enough to create a gap between stimulus and response, between what is happening and your reaction to it. Take a breath, one conscious breath. In through the nose, feeling the chest and belly expand. Out through the nose or mouth, feeling the release. One breath is enough. One breath is sometimes everything. Observe, with the gentle, non-judgmental attention that you would bring to watching weather. Notice what is present, What is happening in the body? Where is there tension? Where is there ease? What is the quality of the mind right now? Busy, quiet, anxious, resigned? What emotions are present? What thoughts are circulating? Just notice. Not to fix or resolve, just to see. Proceed. Continue with what you are doing, or choose differently, but proceed from a state that is at least slightly more conscious than the state you were in before the stop. This practice, repeated throughout the day, is not meditation in the formal sense. It is something more practical than that. It is the insertion of consciousness into the automatic flow of behavior. It is the gap between the trigger and the gun. It is the moment in which you discover that you have a choice, that you are not entirely determined by your conditioning, that the habitual response is not the only possible response. Those gaps accumulate. Over days and weeks and months, the practice of creating gaps, of inserting brief moments of conscious presence into the automatic stream of the day, does something remarkable. It builds what the tradition calls awareness muscle. The capacity to notice, to pause, to choose. The capacity to be the one who is aware, rather than the one who is simply being carried by conditioning. This is freedom, not the dramatic freedom of liberation from all constraint, the quiet, durable, practical freedom of a person who has learned to find the gap. Now you are moving through the day, the subway, the bus, the car on the highway, the walk across a city that is already vibrating with its own complex life. Every one of these transitions is an invitation most people have learned to refuse, but an invitation nonetheless. The subway car is, if you allow it to be, a meditation hall. Not because it is peaceful, because it is not. It is loud and close, and often smells of things you would prefer not to identify. But for exactly those reasons, it is a perfect laboratory for the practice of being here without requiring here to be different. Feel the movement of the train in your body. This is impermanence made physical. The rhythmic sway, the acceleration and deceleration, the way your body constantly adjusts to maintain its faces around you. Not to judge your faces around you, not to judge or categorize or scroll through them like they are content. Look at them the way you might look at faces in a painting in a quiet museum, with a quality of attention that is not searching for anything, that is simply receiving what is there. Every face in that subway car is carrying something. Every face has slept and woken and eaten and worried and loved and lost. Every face has a child somewhere inside it, and an old person waiting to emerge, and a story of such complexity that you could not read it in a lifetime. Every face is the present moment wearing a different disguise. The Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron writes about what she calls the soft spot, the place in every human heart that is still tender, still open, still capable of being moved. The place that has not yet fully calcified into the adult persona of competence and certainty and appropriate emotional distance. She says that spiritual practice, at its best, is not about becoming more spiritual. It is about finding your way back to that soft spot and learning to live from it, rather than in spite of it. The faces in the subway are all soft spots wearing armor. As you are, as I am. Somewhere in the middle of the day, the mind will rebel. It will decide that the present moment is not interesting enough. It will generate an argument about something that happened yesterday or might happen tomorrow. It will produce a loop of planning or worrying or rehearsing conversations that have not yet occurred. It will offer entertainment in the form of comparison, measuring your life against the curated highlights of others' lives, finding yourself lacking in ways that are convenient and numerous. This is not a failure of practice. This is the practice. Every time you notice the mind has left the building, you have a choice. Most of the time, When we notice we have been thinking, the response is immediate self-judgment. I should be more present. I am terrible at this. Everyone else can meditate. Why can't I? The person next to me is meditating perfectly, and I am just sitting here thinking about lunch. This is the second arrow again. The additional suffering added to the simple fact of a wandering mind. What would it look like to notice the wandering with curiosity instead of judgment? Oh, there the mind goes. It is thinking about the presentation next Thursday. How interesting. What is it worried about exactly? What need is being expressed by this particular loop of planning? Not as a therapy session in the middle of the morning meeting, but as a brief, gentle recognition of what is actually happening in the mind, rather than a performance of what should be happening. The Tibetan teacher Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche described the essential quality of meditation as friendliness. Not toward the pleasant parts of your mind, but toward all of it. The planning mind and the anxious mind and the judging mind and the bored mind and the mind that suddenly fills with an inexplicable memory of something that happened in 4th grade. All of it received with friendliness. This does not mean indulging everything. It does not mean following every thought into its rabbit hole. It means receiving what is here without warfare. And the practice of receiving what is here without warfare is, over time, the practice that reveals the ground beneath the noise, the awareness that is not affected by what it contains, the sky that is not disturbed by the clouds. There is a question worth sitting with, not answering quickly, but actually sitting with, that has the power to rearrange how you move through the rest of the day. What would it feel like to be genuinely, fully, unconditionally at home in your own life right now? Not in the imagined future life where the difficulties have resolved. Not in the reconstructed, past life where things were simpler. In this life, this actual configuration of circumstances, relationships, body, age, geography, season, and moment. This question is not asking you to pretend things are better than they are. It is asking something more radical. It is asking what it would feel like to stop treating your own life as a problem to be solved and start treating it as the ground of practice. To stop relating to the present moment as an obstacle on the way to somewhere else and start relating to it as the only somewhere that has ever existed. This is what the tradition means by making your life your practice, not adding a meditation practice to a life that continues as before, not layering spiritual experience on top of ordinary experience and hoping they will eventually integrate, but recognizing that the life you actually have, the one you are living right now, is the teaching, and that every difficulty in it is not evidence that you are doing it wrong, but material for doing it differently. The teacher Rumi wrote in the 13th century, "From a world so different from ours that almost nothing is recognizable, a line that has survived because it is so precisely true. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there." That field is the present moment before judgment, before the mind has decided whether what is happening is good or bad, whether you are winning or losing, whether this moment deserves your full attention or your distracted management. Before all of that, there is simply what is. And what is, received without the overlay of should and should not, is already something remarkable. There is a forest in Japan called Aokigahara. For centuries before it became known for more troubling reasons, local monks would walk into that forest not to escape the world, but to find, in the silence between the trees, the voice of the present moment, speaking beneath the noise of ordinary life. The tradition of walking, meditation of Kinhin and the Zen lineage, is built on this recognition that presence is not a sedentary achievement, that the body moving through space, when the body is attended to rather than merely transported, is a meditation as profound as any sitting. Walk somewhere today not as exercise, not with a destination that colonizes the entire walk with its pull. Walk as a practice of arrival. Feel each step in its fullness, the heel making contact, the transfer of weight, the push off the toe, the brief flight between steps that you have never once noticed in your entire walking life. Notice what the eyes do when they are not trained on a screen, how they move, how they rest on things without agenda. A piece of old brick, a tree growing through a crack in the pavement with the audacity of something that has decided to live. A child's chalk drawing half washed away by yesterday's rain. The way light falls on a window across the street at this particular hour of this particular afternoon. The city, when you actually look at it, is full of impermanence made visible. Nothing is finished. Everything is in the process of becoming or ending or both. The restaurant that closed. The scaffolding around the building that is being reborn. The faded letters of a business that once was. The new face of the building painted over the old one. The city is a living lesson in the same truth the monk reads in the monastery. Everything arises. Everything passes. And the awareness that sees this is not itself arising and passing. It is the witness of arising and passing. And that witness is what you are at the deepest level. The philosopher and contemplative Simone Weil, writing from within a different tradition but arriving at a remarkably similar place, described attention as the rarest and purest form of generosity. She meant the kind of attention she associated with genius in the deepest sense, not the focus of someone trying to solve a problem. The receptive, open, still attention of someone who has stopped imposing their own categories on what they are receiving and is simply willing to see what is actually there. This kind of attention, she wrote, is prayer in the truest sense. Not the words addressed to a hoped-for deity, but the radical act of fully receiving what is. Buddhism would not use the language of prayer, but it recognizes exactly what she is pointing to. The Pali word for loving kindness, metta, has at its root the concept of friendship, of genuine, open-hearted interest in the well-being of another. And genuine interest requires genuine attention, the kind that listens not to confirm what it already knows, but to discover what it does not. When you bring this quality of attention to the present moment, something changes in the moment, not because you have added something to it, but because you have finally showed up for it. The moment, like a person who has been waiting to be seen, reveals more of itself. A sound you did not know was there. A sensation in the body that was broadcasting a signal you kept overriding. A quality of light, a texture of feeling, a thread of something that might be called beauty in the most ordinary possible sense. Not the beautiful as defined by cultural standards, but the beautiful as in worthy of notice, worthy of being here, worthy of your attention. The poet Mary Oliver spent decades writing poems about precisely this, about what happens when you stop being busy long enough to actually look at a grasshopper, a heron, a stand of wild geese crossing an October sky. Her question, asked in many poems in many forms, was always essentially the same. What will you do with your one wild and precious life? The question is not rhetorical. It is asking what you will do with your actual life, the one happening in the moments you are in, not the life you are managing from a safe distance, not the life you are planning for a future that has not arrived, but this one, these breaths, this afternoon, this ordinary, extraordinary moment that is already passing and will not come again. Buddhism's answer is not dramatic. It is not travel more, accumulate experiences, check items off lists, maximize aliveness. The answer is quieter and more radical. Be here, actually here, in this conversation, in this meal, in this difficult meeting, in this grief, in this joy, in this inexplicable, ordinary Tuesday. Be here as if here is worth being in. Because it is. Because here is the only place anything real has ever happened. Because every person who ever mattered to you, you met in the present moment. Every beauty that ever moved you, you experienced in the present moment. Every genuine insight, every real joy, every actual connection, every moment that you look back on now with the tenderness of something irreplaceable, it happened in the present moment, in a now that was exactly as ordinary as this one. You already know this. Some part of you has always known this. The practice is simply the practice of acting as if you know it, moment by moment, day by day, until knowing and living are no longer different. The great fear at the center of all this, the one that the mind rarely names directly, but that drives almost everything, is the fear of death. Not always consciously, not always explicitly, but the restlessness, the rushing, the inability to land, the constant orientation toward the future, the refusal to be present to what is ending, the compulsive production and accumulation and achievement. All of this has at its root the organism's knowledge of its own finitude and the mind's inability to make peace with that knowledge. Buddhism does not pretend this is not difficult. The entire teaching arose, as we have seen, from Siddhartha's encounter with aging, illness, and death. The path begins not with comfort, but with honest looking. What is actually here? What is actually true? And among the things that are true is this: you are going to die. Everyone you love is going to die. Everything you have built and cultivated and accumulated is going to dissolve. The impermanence that the tradition points to is not just about pleasant experiences fading. It is about everything fading, including you. This teaching, when it actually lands, when it moves from intellectual understanding to felt reality, does one of two things. It can spiral into despair, or it can do something else entirely. It can make the present moment suddenly, undeniably precious. The Japanese tradition of mono no aware, the bittersweet awareness of impermanence, captures something of this. The appreciation of the cherry blossom is inseparable from the knowledge of its brief blooming. The beauty and the transience are not intention. The transience is what makes the beauty visible. The knowing that this will pass is precisely what calls you to be here for it while it is here. The monk who has spent years contemplating death, who has sat with the bodies of those who have died, who has practiced what the tradition calls maranasati, mindfulness of death, does not become morbid or hopeless. Almost invariably, these practitioners describe a deepened appreciation for the ordinary, a heightened presence, a capacity for joy in small things that the person protected from the thought of death does not have access to. The present moment, received fully with the knowledge that it is already passing, is not a thin or sorrowful thing. It is extraordinarily rich. It is everything, concentrated into the only container that actually exists. You do not need to become obsessed with death. You do not need to dramatize impermanence. You need only to let the knowledge of it add weight and warmth to what is here, to let the fact of your own finitude, held lightly and honestly, make you more willing to actually arrive in the moments you are given. The moments you are given are these, not the ones in the future that you are managing toward, not the ones in the past that you are rehearsing. These now, the ones that are already becoming memory even as you experience them, the ones that will be counted one day as the substance of a life actually lived. Count them now, while they are still present, while there is still time to receive them. There is a particular kind of courage that this practice requires. Not the loud courage of facing visible danger, the quiet courage of facing yourself. When the noise stops, when the stimulation is removed, When the phone is face down and the screen is dark and there is nothing to do, what arises? For most people, the answer involves some form of discomfort, a restlessness, a vague anxiety, a sense that something is wrong, that something should be happening, that the quiet itself is somehow a problem to be solved. This discomfort is important, not because it should be cultivated for its own sake, but because it is pointing at something. It is showing you what you have been running from, and the willingness to turn around and look at what you have been running from, with gentleness, with curiosity, without immediately trying to fix or numb or explain it away, is the act of practice that everything else depends on. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke, in his Letters to a Young Poet, wrote something that has served as a kind of compass for generations of people engaged in this kind of inner work. He said that we should try to love the questions themselves as if they were locked rooms or books written in a very foreign language, and to live the questions. Perhaps then, one distant day, we will gradually, without even noticing, live our way into the answer. The present moment is both the question and the answer. It is the locked room and the key. It is the foreign language and the translation that eventually becomes available when you stop demanding it arrive on your schedule. You cannot force your way into the present moment. The forcing is itself the distance. But you can stop running from it. You can stop filling every available space with the noise that keeps it at bay. You can let it find you in the gaps, in the pauses, in the moments between the doing, when you allow yourself simply to be, and when it finds you, which it always does when you stop hiding, it will not announce itself dramatically. It will not arrive as an experience of light or bliss or mystical union, though sometimes those things happen too. More often, it will arrive as a quality of aliveness that was always there, suddenly noticeable, a sense of being here that is so ordinary that you almost dismiss it, a recognition so simple that the mind wants to add complexity to it, to make it feel more earned. This is enough. I am here. There is breath. There is the sound of the world continuing. There is the weight of a body alive in this moment, which has never happened before and will not happen again in quite this way. There is something watching all of this, aware of all of this, neither inside nor outside, neither coming nor going. That is the present moment. That is what has been calling you back your entire life. That is home. We have been circling something that needs to be said directly. The practice of presence is not neutral. It changes things, not all at once, not dramatically, not usually, but over time. The consistent practice of returning to the present moment, of withdrawing attention from the story about experience and bringing it back to actual experience, begins to shift the relationship to everything. Relationships change, because when you are genuinely present with another person, something happens between you that cannot happen otherwise. The other person feels it, not always consciously, but in the body, in the quality of attention they receive from you. Most of us are so accustomed to being half listened to being heard by minds that are simultaneously composing their next response, that genuine presence from another person lands with unusual force. It is felt as care, as respect, as love, in the most fundamental sense of the word. Work changes, not necessarily the tasks themselves, but the quality of engagement with them. When you are actually here, doing what you are doing, there is a precision and a care available that is simply not available when you are performing the task with one part of your attention while another part rehearses tomorrow's problems. The quality of work done from presence is different, not always faster, but almost always more aligned with what actually needs to be done rather than what feels urgent. Health changes, not magically, not as a promise or a guarantee, but because the body is always trying to communicate something. And most of the time, the mind is too busy with its stories to receive the message. The chronic tension in the shoulders that, when actually attended to, reveals itself to be the physical expression of an emotional burden being carried without acknowledgement. The tiredness that is not tiredness, but a deep need for quiet. The appetite that is not hunger, but loneliness. Presence gives access to the body's intelligence in a way that the thinking mind, with its fixed categories and its preference for intellectual solutions to what are often somatic problems, cannot. And gradually, very gradually, the relationship to time changes. The constant urgency softens, not because there is less to do, but because the quality of doing has changed. The present moment, once it becomes recognizable, once it becomes something you have actually tasted rather than merely heard described, is no longer something to rush through on the way to somewhere more important. It becomes, slowly, home. There is a teaching in the Diamond Sutra, one of the foundational texts of Mahayana Buddhism, that is phrased with the paradoxical precision that is the tradition's signature. It says roughly, "The mind should be allowed to operate without abiding anywhere." Without abiding anywhere. This does not mean a scattered mind, with no focus. It means a mind that holds its objects of attention lightly, that does not grip them, does not make them into fortresses, does not turn its preferences into requirements for peace. A mind that can be fully here and then fully elsewhere when circumstances call for it, and then fully here again, without the terrible friction of resistance. This is the athlete's flow state, described in an ancient text 2,500 years before sports psychology would reinvent it. This is the artist's absorption, the scientist's moments of genuine discovery, the parent's complete presence with their child in a single, ordinary afternoon. These states are glimpses of what the tradition is pointing toward, not rare achievements requiring special conditions, but the natural result of a mind that has stopped fighting the present moment. The fighting is exhausting. We are so accustomed to it that we mistake the exhaustion for the natural condition of adult life. We believe that adulthood is supposed to feel like effort, that the restlessness is appropriate, that the low-grade dissatisfaction humming beneath the activities of the day is normal, even sensible, even a sign of intelligence and awareness. It is not. Or rather, it is normal in the statistical sense, in the sense that it is the condition of most people most of the time. But it is not inevitable, and it is not what you are when the overlay is removed. The afternoon is moving toward evening now. At some point in the second half of the day, there is usually a moment when the energy that carried the morning drops and something more honest comes through. The tiredness is real. The body signals its limits with an authority the mind would prefer to override, but cannot entirely ignore. This is a teaching moment. The culture says push through. The culture has built an entire infrastructure around the bypassing of this natural rhythm. Caffeine, artificial light, the gamification of productivity that makes any pause feel like falling behind, the social approval of overwork as evidence of seriousness, commitment, worth. Buddhism proposes a different relationship to limits. The teaching of the middle way is not primarily about moderation in the ordinary sense. It is about the wisdom to know when pushing serves and when it depletes. It is about learning to read your own system with the same intelligence and care you would bring to anything else you valued. The present moment in the afternoon, when the body is asking for rest or quiet or a change of mode, is not an enemy. It is information. It is the body being honest in a way the mind often refuses to be. Receive it, even for 5 minutes. Close the laptop. Close the eyes. Let the afternoon do what afternoons are designed to do, which is to remind you that you are not a machine, that the rhythm of living things includes not only effort and activity, but rest and consolidation and the quiet integration of what the morning produced. 5 minutes of actual rest, of genuine present moment receptivity, will do more for the quality of the next 3 hours than another cup of coffee. Not always, not as a guarantee, but often enough to make it worth testing. There is a story told in various forms across the Buddhist traditions, simple enough to risk being dismissed and true enough to stay with you for years. A monk is asked by a student, "What happens after death?" The monk says, "I don't know." The student is shocked. "But you are a master. You have practiced for decades." The monk says, "Yes, but a dead one." This answer is not evasion. It is the present moment teaching in its most concentrated form. The great unknown does not have to be resolved in order for this moment to be fully inhabited. The questions that have no answers do not have to be answered in order for this breath to be taken completely. The mystery of existence does not require solution before you are permitted to arrive in your own life. The most honest position available to any human being is the one the monk takes. I do not know what comes next. I do not know what this means. I do not know how it ends. But I am here now, alive, breathing, aware, and that is already more than it needed to be. The philosopher's questions, what is the self? What is consciousness? What is the nature of reality? These are beautiful questions worth asking. But they do not need to be resolved before you are allowed to taste your morning tea. They do not need to be resolved before you can feel the warmth of someone you love sitting near you. They do not need to be resolved before the present moment becomes, in its irreducible simplicity, enough. The presence of mystery is not a problem to be solved. It is the condition of wonder. And wonder, genuine wonder, not performed wonder, but the actual felt experience of encountering something larger than your categories, is what the present moment is offering in every direction. Look at your own hand for a moment. Not critically. Not as a thing to evaluate for its age or its size, or whether it is doing the right things. Look at it with the fresh eyes of someone who has never seen a hand before. The extraordinary complexity of it. The way it moves without your conscious direction. The skin, with its specific texture and particular history, its lines and marks, and the memories embedded in its shape. The warmth of it, which means there is life moving through it right now, blood carrying oxygen from a breath you took without thinking. You are holding a miracle and calling it a hand. The present moment is holding you, and you are calling it Tuesday. Come back. You are being called back. There is a concept in Japanese aesthetics that has no direct translation into English. The word is ma. It is often translated as negative space, or the pause between notes, or the interval between objects. But these translations miss something essential about what ma actually points to. Ma is not empty space. It is a quality of space. It is the breathing room between things that allows the things themselves to be what they are. It is the silence between notes that gives the music its shape. It is the space in a painting that allows the elements of the painting to speak. It is the pause in a conversation that allows what has just been said to actually land. Without ma, notes become noise. Elements become clutter. Words become static. The present moment is ma. It is the living space between past and future. It is the breathing room in which experience can actually occur. And a life without sufficient ma, a life packed so continuously with stimulation and demand, and response and production, is a life in which experience, real experience, the kind that changes you and teaches you and makes you more fully yourself, cannot find anywhere to land. Buddhist architecture understood this. The great temples and gardens are built around emptiness as much as structure. The raked gravel of a Zen garden is not a failure of landscaping. The emptiness is the point. It is an invitation to ma, to the quality of mind that can receive what is empty, rather than always demanding what is full. Your life needs more ma, not as a spiritual luxury, as a functional necessity. The mind, like any creative and responsive system, requires alternation between activity and rest, between engagement and withdrawal, between the full and the empty. Without that alternation, it does not sustain. It contracts. It becomes rigid. It produces less insight and more reaction, less wisdom and more automation. Create ma today. Close a door. Turn off a sound. Sit in a room without immediately filling it with something. Let 5 minutes be 5 minutes of nothing in particular, and notice what arises from the nothing. What arises is almost always the present moment, announcing itself in the only way it can. In the absence of the noise, its signal becomes audible. Let us speak plainly about the phone, not to condemn it. The phone connects, creates, informs, entertains. It carries the voices of people you love across distances that would have made communication impossible a generation ago. It contains maps that prevent getting lost and knowledge that would have required a library to access. It is a remarkable object, and the impulse to use it is not stupidity or weakness. But the phone is also, for most people alive today, the primary instrument of escape from the present moment. And it is an escape that is designed by some of the most sophisticated minds on earth to be as compelling and as difficult to stop as possible. The engineers and psychologists employed by the major technology platforms understand the human nervous system in extraordinary detail. They know that the variable reward schedule, the unpredictable delivery of interesting or pleasurable or enraging content, is the most powerful behavioral conditioning mechanism known to psychology. They know that social validation, the notification that someone responded, that someone liked, that someone followed, activates the same dopamine pathways as gambling. They know that the fear of missing out is among the most reliable drivers of compulsive behavior in social animals like us. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is the openly stated design philosophy of systems that measure their success in units of time stolen from your actual life. Every minute you spend in the feed is a minute not spent in your own experience. Every scroll is a choice, though it rarely feels like one, to be elsewhere rather than here. The present moment cannot compete with the feed in terms of raw stimulation. The feed is optimized for the nervous system's attraction to novelty and threat and social information. The present moment is quiet by comparison. It does not push notifications. It does not send updates. It does not offer infinite variety. It offers depth. And depth requires a kind of attention that the feed specifically trains you out of. This is why the practice of presence in the modern world requires, at some point, an active and deliberate relationship with the technology that competes for your presence. Not rejection, but discernment. Not a moralistic prohibition, but an honest accounting of the trade. When you pick up the phone to avoid discomfort, what discomfort are you avoiding? When you reach for the scroll in the moment between one thing and the next, what would you experience if you stayed in that moment instead? When you fill every silence with input, what is the silence that you are afraid of? These are not rhetorical questions. They are the actual questions, and their answers, if you sit with them, will tell you more about yourself than anything available in the feed. The practice is simple, not easy. Simple. Leave spaces. 1 meal a week eaten without a screen of any kind. Not as a performance of minimalism, but as a genuine practice of tasting your food, of noticing the process of eating, of being present for one ordinary activity without the addition of entertainment. 1 walk a week without headphones. Not every walk. 1. long enough to move through the initial restlessness and arrive at whatever is on the other side, which is almost always more interesting than what the headphones were providing. The first 5 minutes of the morning without the phone. 5 minutes in which you belong to yourself before you belong to the algorithm. These are not heroic acts. They are small, deliberate acts of reclaiming presence. And they accumulate. They build the habit of choosing here, of trusting that here is enough, of discovering that depth is available precisely where stimulation is absent. As the day finds its way toward night, there is a practice that takes less than 5 minutes and has the potential to transform not just the quality of your sleep, but the quality of how you understand your own life. Before the phone, before the news, before the passive consumption that fills the space, between the end of the day and the beginning of unconsciousness, sit quietly, even on the edge of the bed, even for 3 minutes, and review the day not as a productivity manager checking tasks completed, but as a gentle witness noticing what actually happened. Where were you present? Not where should you have been present. Where were you actually here? A moment in the morning when something surprised you. An exchange with someone that felt genuine. A few seconds looking out a window at something that made you pause. A meal that you actually tasted rather than consumed while doing something else. These moments exist in every day, even in the difficult days. Even in the days that feel like they gave you nothing, the present moment was there, offering itself, in between the urgency and the noise. Sometimes you received it. Those moments are worth finding and naming, not to perform gratitude, but to reinforce the neural pathways that make noticing the present moment more likely tomorrow. Then name one thing that was difficult. Not to analyze it or solve it or feed it more energy before sleep. Simply to acknowledge that it happened, that it was real, that you moved through it. The acknowledgement is itself a completion. It allows the difficult thing to be finished rather than left open, unresolved, a task the sleeping mind will try to finish without the tools to do so. And then name one thing you will carry into tomorrow. Not a plan or a task, but an intention. A quality of attention you want to bring. May tomorrow be a day in which I notice more. May tomorrow be a day in which I listen before I respond. May tomorrow be a day in which I treat the present moment as what it is, rather than what it is not. The night is its own present moment. Sleep is not an absence of experience, but a different kind of experience. One in which the conscious self releases its grip and something deeper in the organism does its necessary work. The body repairs. The mind consolidates. The deeper intelligence processes what the day could not. Honor the night by actually going to it, not delaying it with another hour of stimulation that leaves the nervous system lit and unable to settle. The capacity to rest is itself a practice. The willingness to let the day be finished and trust that tomorrow will take care of itself is, in its own way, an act of profound presence. We are approaching the end, and the end is also a beginning. Everything the Buddhist traditions have discovered about the present moment can be summarized in a single word. Attention. Not the managed, allocated, instrumentalized attention of the productivity system. Not the monetized, harvested, sold attention of the platform economy. The attention of a person who has come home to themselves. The attention that is genuinely available, not because everything has been resolved, but because the person giving it has stopped running long enough to look. This kind of attention is the rarest thing in the world. It is what every human being is hungry for, underneath all the other hungers. The hunger to be truly seen, to be truly heard, to be in the presence of someone who is actually here with you, rather than performing presence while being somewhere else entirely. The hunger to be in your own presence in the same way. To stop being a stranger to your own life. The present moment is not something you achieve. It is something you return to. Again and again. 1,000 times a day if necessary. Without frustration. Without the expectation that this time you will finally stay. Simply returning, with the same gentle commitment with which the tide returns to the shore, because that is its nature, because that is what it does. You do not need a monastery. You need 3 breaths. You do not need a teacher. You need the willingness to actually feel what is happening in your body right now, in this moment, before the mind has organized it into a story about your life. You do not need enlightenment before you are allowed to be here. You are allowed to be here because you are here. You have always been here. The present moment has always been calling. The only question that has ever mattered is whether you are ready to listen. Close your eyes if you want, not to sleep, to arrive. Feel the weight of the body where it rests. Feel the breath moving through it without your direction. Feel the temperature of the air. The sounds that exist in your environment right now, the near ones and the far ones, the ones you recognize and the ones you cannot name. You are here. This is the beginning. It is always the beginning. The city will keep roaring. The inbox will keep filling. The schedule will keep making its demands. The past will keep sending its memories, and the future will keep sending its anxieties. None of that changes. What changes is you, in the middle of it, standing on ground that was always there, breathing air that was always available, arriving in a moment that was never, not once, anything other than now. The present moment has been calling you back your entire life. You were born ready to listen. Share this with the one who is running and does not know how to stop, and stay close to this channel, because the practice continues and you do not have to walk it alone.